trunks for the southpaw, the notorious Conor McGregor. Black trunks for the champion, Jose Aldo Jr.
Conor relaxed, smiling.
Oh! He slapped him!
They're so even on total strikes at the moment.
Many people will agree that nothing in sports can evoke the kind of crowd reaction that a knockout would. Since the promotion's debut years ago, UFC has provided MMA fans with hundreds of incredible knockouts. In this video, we'll be taking a look at the top 10 UFC knockouts of all time and the crowd reaction. But before we get started, take a moment to smash that like button and subscribe to our channel. Now, let's get started. Number 10. KAMARUUSMAN vs. Jorge Masvidal, UFC 261. At UFC 261, one of the most durable fighters in MMA was put to sleep. Jorge Masvidal had only suffered one knockout loss in his 17th pro fight before UFC 261. Prior to the fight, Masvidal had 49 fights over the course of an 18-year career and has barely been hurt in a fight, let alone knocked out cold. It was for this reason that KAMARUUSMAN's resounding finish to their two-fight feud at UFC 261 was so spectacular, especially because he faced a version of Masvidal that was vastly improved from the one Rodrigo Dam encountered when he stopped him in 2008. Number 9. Amanda Nunes vs. CRIS CYBORG, UFC 232. Prior to UFC 232, it was widely acknowledged that CRIS CYBORG was the scariest fighter in the history of women's MMA, thanks to her record of 17 knockouts in 20 straight contests. Many anticipated the trend would continue when she entered the octagon to defend her featherweight belt against bantamweight champion Amanda Nunes. Nunes, however, was not having it. A major pivot point for women's MMA was defeating CYBORG at her own game. Nunes replaced CRIS as the baddest woman on the planet, and she had 2 UFC championship belts as evidence. Number 8. Mauricio Rua vs. LYOTO MACHIDA, UFC 113. After fighting an uncharacteristically strategic fight during their first encounter, Mauricio Shogun Rua defeated LYOTO MACHIDA in the opening round of their second encounter. Unlike the first bout, Machida decided to fight more aggressively and fought for takedowns. Unfortunately for Machida, Rua did a fantastic job in getting back up. Both combatants engaged in more aggressive fighting on the feet, and Machida this time stood his ground. Machida decided to move in and attack in response to Rua's leg strikes. Although it was an aggressive strategy, Rua was ready for it. Therefore, it ended up being Machida's undoing. In the post-fight news conference, Rua stated that he had prepared himself with punches of his own in case Machida moved in to counter kicks. Rua knocked Machida to the ground with a powerful right-hand punch. He then gained a mount position where he scored the knockout. It was the first time LYOTO, the Dragon Machida, was floored in his UFC career. And shortly after that, he had his lights turned out completely. Rua accomplished what at the time seemed impossible and created a classic UFC knockout moment. Number 7. Anderson Silva vs. VITOR BELFORT, UFC 126. MMA fans finally got what they had been waiting for when Anderson Silva faced VITOR BELFORT at UFC 126, an opponent who could strike just as effectively as Silva. Anderson Silva had already faced some formidable strikers, but BELFORT was a wrecking ball that many thought had the skills to instill fear in Silva's heart. The then longtime middleweight champion served up a front kick just over a minute into the bout that will live on in his professional highlight reel forever. He defeated a fighter considered to be as skilled a striker as he was in a title fight while using a technique that is rarely employed successfully. It was at that moment that Anderson Silva went from being just a champion to an MMA legend. Number 6. Francis Ngannou vs. ALISTAR OVEREEM. ALISTAR Overeem getting knocked out wasn't a new occurrence when Francis Ngannou did so to him again in UFC 218. It had already occurred 4 times in the octagon, some of which were rather noteworthy. But none of them had the same terrifying effect as this one. As you watch the uppercut that Ngannou released that night over and over again, a part of you will always be surprised Overeem's head managed to stay attached to his body. While Ngannou had scored a number of notable knockouts, none were as terrifying as this one. Number 5. Daniel Cormier vs. Stipe Miocic, UFC 226. Daniel Cormier had 9 career knockouts prior to UFC 226. Only 2 of them, though, occurred when he was competing in the UFC. As a result, the light heavyweight champion Daniel Cormier, in a move up to heavyweight, was the last person you would have predicted to add Stipe Miocic to an all-time UFC knockouts list. However, Cormier surprised the world and changed history. He became the second person to hold the heavyweight and lightweight heavyweight belts. He was the first to hold both belts simultaneously, and the second to hold 2 belts at once in UFC history. Furthermore, he did so by defeating the man who many consider to be the best heavyweight of all time. Number 4. Dan Henderson vs. Michael Bisping, UFC 100. Dan Henderson's reputation for having power in his hands was well established even before he joined the UFC. However, his knockout at UFC 100 was his first quintessential H-bomb moment on the United States shores. In 4 prior appearances in the octagon, fans had yet to witness the strength that defeated legendary mixed martial artists like Wanderlei Silva and Akihiro Gono when Dan Henderson competed for Pride Fighting Championship. His Battle of the Ultimate Fighter coaches scrap with Michael Bisping, though, seemed to be the ideal match for the H-Bomb's UFC debut. Number 3. Joaquin Buckley vs. IMPA KASANGANY, UFC Fight Night 179. At UFC Fight Night 179, Joaquin Buckley had a moment that is probably going to linger in the minds of die-hard MMA fans forever. The unpredictable nature of this sport was taken to another level after Buckley, who had his kick caught by IMPA KASANGANY, turned it into a jump spin kick knockout with the other leg. It was undoubtedly the best knockout of the year in 2020, and will probably appear in all future UFC marketing videos for the next decade. Number 2. Holly Holm vs. Ronda Rousey, UFC 193. Women's MMA was forever changed at UFC 193 when Holly Holm had kicked Ronda Rousey into an early nap. Not in terms of technique or fundamentals, but more in the way that the women's side of the sport was able to get out from behind Ronda Rousey's superstar shadow. Rousey started the bout aggressively. Holly Holm frequently tagged Rousey with her left hand while controlling the distance thanks to her boxing skills and southpaw stance. Throughout the round, Rousey attempted multiple clinches, including an attempted armbar, but none were successful. By the time the first round was over, Rousey was covered in blood and breathing heavily. According to the commentators, it was the first time in her MMA career that she had lost a round. Similar to the first round, Rousey attempted to narrow the gap in round 2, but was unable due to Holm's stick and move tactic. After taking a straight left to the chin, Rousey stumbled forward. As she was rising, Holm delivered a kick to the side of Rousey's neck, knocking her out. When Rousey fell, Holm rushed on her, forcing the referee to stop the fight. Rousey was forcibly removed from the equation by Holm, and the door was open for new faces to emerge and share in the spotlight. It closed a crucial first chapter for women in the UFC and opened a subsequent one that was much better. Number 1. Conor McGregor vs. Jose Aldo, UFC 194. Jose Aldo was unbeaten for more than 15 fights, starting from his World Extreme Cage Fighting debut up until his match with Conor McGregor. Aldo had defended the featherweight title 9 times and had defeated top competitors at that time, including Frankie Edgar, Chad Mendes, Uriah Faber, Kenny Florian, and Chad Mendes. However, Conor McGregor changed it all in just 13 seconds. Even today, it remains a mind-blowing thought. In 13 seconds, one of the greatest athletes to ever enter the octagon was knocked out. Don't hesitate to share your thoughts in the comments section below. Also, be sure to give this video a like and subscribe to our channel if you're yet to do so. See you in the next video.